forgot to remind you to restream it on your channel. So
I
Claire, tell
just
me
done that,
something.
thank you.
That's awesome. Yeah. So Claire, what do you want to say about yourself? And we're going to be going through Claire's book today, um, which is the picture you can see. The cover is her face. Normally it's just her eyes, but now it's her eyes with writing on top. But Claire, go on.
Well,
Something about
thank you.
yourself.
I I am an agnostic, non-Muslim, um, political activist and commentator, um, campaigning to basically restore common sense to Western governments who are going mad. And I think the reason why they're going mad is because they haven't got a religion to give themselves an identity and rules for each other to regulate their behavior towards each other, as well as to make sure that the ruling classes look after the country properly. And unfortunately, it is the case that Christianity has broken down, and they can't accept that, and they're in denial, and they hate me for pointing out that Christo-liberalism is kaput, and that's why they're not buying my book in droves.
So I should say, I will be probably smiling and laughing when Claire talks because she's very funny. It does show in her book as well. Her book is exactly like her talking. So let's. So what I'm planning on doing, Claire, probably said this or it was just in my mind. Actually, you suggested, isn't it? We're going to go through different parts of your book because I did a review on your book. And they were like, "Oh, this is interesting. This is interesting," and some ideas are quite unique. Let me quickly do a share screen. Where is this? Is this the one? That's the one. Okay, so that's Claire's book, and then there was a bit that I highlighted. Let's see what happens. Would it go in the right place? There we go. A principle is something you make a point of always doing. I feel like laughing before I even read it, but anyway, a principle is a point. Sorry, is something you make a point of always doing or never doing, whether it is resulted in praise, reward, or punishment. It is this that Westerners no longer understand, rendering them no better than cattle easily controlled with carrot and stick. Now, it might seem pure, for some people, it might seem like a pure insult. Um, as I said, um, the idea is not to purely insult people, but hopefully maybe be a little bit shocking and say, you know what, hang on a minute, have you realized we're doing, I don't want to go into too much yet, but so many crazy things nowadays. And like, who is falling for all these crazy things? It's definitely not religious people who are falling for every single fad that goes by. Like, for example, you can be a man or a cat or whatever you identify as. Who is it? It's atheists. Um, yeah. So let's just keep the conversation. I've got a few ideas as to why this is the case. It was really interesting when I read this in a book and we had a discussion about this being easy manipulated. I didn't really like realize it until you put it this way that yes, it is really easy for atheists to be manipulated. Tell me some ideas about this. Can you I don't know, share some thoughts about this?
Well, before we spoke, I sent you this brilliant interview of Andrew Tate with Tucker Carlson. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it
Oh
because
yeah, I
it's
saw
two
it
and a
this
half
morning.
hours
That
long.
was really good. Yeah, yeah. You mean this
And
morning?
he,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
and he was going on about the same thing about being controlled and basically saying that atheists are you know they can see that the sky is blue, but if they're told that the sky is green, they'll look at the sky again and say, oh yes, it's green. And he gave this clip of this trans person telling this young man that he's really a woman.
Hmm.
I don't know. I mean, because I went through it twice because I thought it was so good. I
Yeah, it
may
was.
remember it better than you do. But basically, the whole point about religion, which I keep trying to explain to people, is that people don't have it for fun. It's not some accessory, a necklace or a bracelet that you wear to make yourself pretty. It's actually a boiler, a working boiler to tell you who you are and how you are to behave. And I guess after so many years of liberalism, they hate the idea of anybody telling them what to do. So they can't follow orders, they can't follow rules, and that's why they're like what they are now.
Fascinating, yes. This idea about not being able to follow rules or wanting to follow rules. That's really interesting. Um,
They're like
so
safety
yeah,
rails, is what I'm trying to say to them. You need safety rails. You need, a path so you don't wander off, onto, the verge.
okay, yeah. So putting some sort of boundaries on, let's say, what religious people would describe as sensible, but then the liberals, as they're often described, people who believe in doing anything, I suppose, um, say, well, that's closed-minded to be restricted to certain ideas. That would
Thank you
maybe
for
make
mentioning
sense. Go on, go on.
oh,
Oh.
yes, you mentioned liberalism, and I felt I had to make this point about liberalism because it's really from the French Revolution. And when the French revolutionaries did their thing, they were really a bit mad. If you know anything about the history of the French Revolution, they were chopping off people's heads, in lots of it. And it was a terrible time for France, and the rest of Europe were terrified by the ideas of the French Revolution. And you know how radical they were being because they changed the measurements as well as their calendar, and they were actually creating a religion which is now what they call secularism. And one of the tenets of their religion is to say that if you're a Muslim going to the beach, you can't wear your burkini. You have to wear something more revealing, which is
Hmm.
kind of odd when you think about it. When you think about the freedom that these liberals are supposed to have.
Yeah. So people who think being liberal makes you more intelligent because you supposedly think through all these things. I really do think you have to say supposedly because I really don't think anybody's thought through this idea that if you're a man, you can pretend to be a woman or a child or a cat or whatever, or a helicopter if you feel like. Um, and you can see that they can't support their beliefs because from my own experience in Speaker's Corner, those people, the trans activists, are the ones who refuse to engage in conversation, which is the whole point of Speaker's Corner. This is a famous debate place, if you don't know, in London. Um, and they just make noise so that you can't have a conversation. They literally bring umbrellas so that they can block you. So it would be nice if they were truly searching for the truth, but it doesn't seem to be the case. They're in reality, they're simply taking on ideas to escape responsibility from being told to do anything. It seems to be that's all it is. That's what it seems to boil down to. I want to be free to do anything rather than I want to be free to do something important or useful that I've thought about logically. What do you think?
Well, yes, because inevitably, I mean, liberalism wasn't all about sexual liberation. Certainly, it wasn't when it first started. It was about free trade, and then free freedom of belief, freedom of expression, and then it then became in the 21st century, um, free to, sexual liberty from the rules of marriage and good parenting, and that I think has accelerated the decline and dementia of the West because um, if you're always saying, "Why don't I do this? Why don't I jump off the roof? Why don't I drink poison? Why don't I, take off all my clothes and run down the street?" Maybe a lot of things you can't immediately think, well, that's really not a good idea. I only have a bad feeling about it, and
Hmm.
um, And also the whole ideology is just liberalism and conservatism, liberalism and conservatism. And when you think about it, conservatism was actually only a defensive ideology that they cooked up to protect themselves against the crazier ideas of the French Revolution, and because they still had some Christianity left, in the 18th century, they were okay. They didn't they hadn't gone completely mad at the time, and but the conservatism that they were using really came from Christianity, but over the years they lost faith.
Mm,
And completely disbelieved in Christianity anymore, and they haven't really tidied up their home and say, yes, I've got to separate all the things that I need and throw out the things that I don't, which are just taking up space in the house, that kind of idea. They've just let it all stay, and it's just confusing them, because
mm,
conservatism has never really worked, because conservatism was just the junior partner to this coin of liberalism and conservatism. So that's why the
interesting.
conservatism is just nowhere. They always will dilute their principles and give in to the liberals who say, why don't we do this, why don't we do that, you're just a party pooper for saying no. And they always say, yeah, we're party poopers, sorry. There's that kind of
Yeah, there's no, when you say conservatism, it's not like they're conserving things that they've thought of like 300 years ago. The goalposts do keep changing, I think, like you're suggesting, because they keep conceding to liberal ideas. That, for example, a lot of the conservatives of, I saw a conservative part, no, neocon, I don't know what they call it. I'm sorry about the terms, but there's this Douglas Murray. He always turns up to these things, and he's a gay man
hmm
who turns up to these events which are supported by Christians,
hmm
and um, they don't really keep any of their Christian values, just the idea that they're Christian, and they only hang on to one or two principles. Like, for example, we don't believe that you can change your identity. But a few years ago, it would have been, we don't believe you can be homosexual, and then Douglas Murray wouldn't be able to turn up to these events. So yeah, I do feel like that's a really interesting point that I didn't really think about, which is conservatism isn't really conservatism; it's conservatism that keeps moving the goalposts based on pressures of liberalism, I suppose.
Yeah, it's not even a proper ideology, because there's no sort of great conservative thinker saying conservative principles are X, Y, and Z. I mean, Marxism at least had an originator, which was of course Karl Marx, and he wrote Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto, and communists can always go back and say this is our Bible, this is our official you know um, handbook. But liberals, sort of conservatives, they haven't got anything like that. They
Hmm.
literally haven't. I mean,
Yeah.
neither do liberals. I mean, to be fair, but the I'm just saying that the ideas of the French Revolution are even now causing harm to Westerners, but they don't seem to realise that all the consequences of the French Revolution are still being played out.
Yeah. It makes me think about what makes us really happy. People in the West have been brought up on this idea that if you're free, you'll automatically be happy. You just need more choices in the shops, more stuff to buy, more whatever, do anything you want, and you'll be free. But in religion, that's considered being an animal,
Yes,
because you're
yes.
just, and then you suffer from being an animal. Like, your relationships have no rules, therefore you suffer, and you're not an animal. You're a sensitive human being that cares that your wife is having sex with another stranger or something.
Yes, and they try to pretend it doesn't matter, or they don't care, and it drives themselves, it drives them crazy, because basically, okay, if you think about it as an examination, a multiple, one of those objective tests. So you have a choice. If it's just A and B, A and B, you think, oh, even I don't really know the answer, I'm probably able to guess it correctly. But imagine, if you have all these questions to answer, and you have A to Z. all the options. And of course, you don't have time to look at all of them. And then you just sort of, quickly choose one. And then at the end of it, you think, I'm sure I got it all wrong, because I had so many choices. I didn't really have time to go through them properly, and I'm sure I made the wrong choice. And then you spend the rest of your life beating yourself up about it. And in terms of sex partners, you will think, maybe the one that I slept with, the 15th one, was the one, but I just moved on, and now I'm on my 300th sex partner. So that would be one of the reasons for a lifetime of regret and mental illness.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson explained it really well in that he said something along the lines of, you cannot really work out all the principles of life. It just, there's too many things. A lifetime is not long enough. So basically, that was his argument for essentially a religion of some sort. Um, so yeah, there are too many choices, and they're incredibly difficult choices. Every tiny thing is a difficult choice, and that's really apparent in the way everything is breaking down. Relationships are breaking down. People are in 50% of what 18 to 30-year-olds are. Haven't had sex for a year, and they're not even looking for people to marry. 50% of relationships are breaking down. People are suffering from body image issues, and you might say, what's that got to do with choices? Well, religious people don't suffer from those body image issues, and I suppose, yeah. So yeah, religion
Because
help.
religious people sort of know that they have to marry, and they don't have
Hmm.
these ridiculous, um, highly entitled ideas of who their partner ought to be, super rich, super tall, super handsome, super beautiful, super whatever, that they think, watching movies that they're entitled to. And it's
Yes,
like,
that's really
if
interesting.
it's an
Yeah.
arranged marriage, as long as mum and dad are happy and I don't find him or her too objectionable, I'll go for it.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that in the vacuum of not having a religion and a set of clear ideas, we always look for them. That's why people look for, self-help books and things to figure out what's going on, because this life's really complicated and is really difficult. And you get it wrong really badly. You feel you feel the results by everything in your life getting mixed up. So many people are increasingly getting depressed and on drugs and things like that. So yeah, and the vacuum is filled with actually other religions, either from self-help books, which is individual people's religions, or Hollywood movies, like you're saying. So there's a religion that most people, and I didn't even realize I had, which is called romanticism, which is, I looked at all these movies and I saw these women who are like doing somersaults and whatever, and I thought, oh, that's such a cool woman. But like, there's no women like that. Women are not like that. They're like soft and delicate and whatever. They don't want to throw the bin out. My wife tells me to throw the bin out. You know, they're not like the Avengers. And so
Hmm.
we take in all these really dumb ideas, and that becomes our alternative religion if we don't have one already. And religious people don't tend to fall for it, like kind of like what you're saying, because they've got very clear ideas of how things should be. And I think the good thing about having clear ideas about how they should be is that you can inspect them. You can say, I'm not sure about you. People in Speaker's Corner are always debating every single element of Islam or Christianity and saying, does that make sense? But with a liberal, you just got endless moving goalposts. You don't really know what your religion is because you're learning it subconsciously. So you're coming up with stupid ideas and you don't even know what those ideas are. And they can't be inspected or tested or whatever. What do you
Well,
think?
the thing is, it's so confusing that down under, the Liberal Party is actually the Conservative Party. I mean, I don't know if you know
Oh,
that. I mean, but they have two main
oh.
parties, Labour and Liberal, and then you think, if you could look up the history of the Conservative Party, all these previous Liberal parties have merged with the Conservative Party. They've actually merged, and nobody knows this. And then, if you're a bit of an anorak like me and you read their constitution, they talk about the principles of the Conservative Party, and they have no principles. If you ask them, they say, well, our manifesto, in our last election said blah, blah, blah. And nobody even thinks to force them into a corner and say, what are your principles? And because the truth is that they'll have to say, well, we'll have to, wait for the next election before we publish our next manifesto.
Hmm.
They literally don't have principles. I mean, and
Yeah.
that is really, truly their problem. And if you have no principles, it means you have no religion. And if you have no religion, well, I mean, if you have no religion, you have no principles. And if you have no principles, you won't defend anything. And that's why they always give in. All these
Hmm.
politicians, they might accidentally speak the truth and then apologize for it three days later because, people are angry with them for speaking the truth.
That's
So they're
fascinating because the difference with Muslims is that they feel the necessity to defend it because there's a high authority that it's based on, and therefore if you're if you're saying something bad about these principles, you're basically insulting God. So it's worth defending. But if you've got these ideas that you've come up with that were only 5 minutes old and nobody believes them, just before that, you don't really believe they're absolutely the best ideas worth defending. You can be like, maybe it's wrong. Let's just toss it out the window like the other ideas, I suppose.
Yes, but if you've lived all your life, on this wrong thing, you thought, oh, I don't know, whatever it is that they think, and it becomes their own religion. They talk about their beliefs. It's like, my belief is, oh, I don't know, that the Jews did it, or I hate Muslims, or something of that nature. And if they've believed it for a long time, they're not going to change it because it will mean that they'll be
Uh,
wrong all their lives or most of their lives. So they're not going to change it. And it actually has become a religion.
yes, fascinating. Yeah, I do find that a lot. That people have a bad idea, but then they keep it for so long that their ego makes them real not let it go because they want to prove that they're smart.
Or they
Fascinating.
don't want to admit that they're wrong,
Yeah, and then why do they not want to admit they're wrong? Because if it's their ego that
which
has.
they worship as a god. Because the only way of explaining this is that they're basically worshipping their own stupid opinions. And they're probably going to kill somebody over it, because it's so important to them. And it's like, but it's just a stupid opinion. And your opinion is obviously, not all of, is weaker than you really, because you're actually capable of changing your opinion in theory, but you refuse.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Um, so I'm trying to always classify and group the learning points we've got here. So one is that there's a lack of clear principles that you can analyze and say, does this make sense? Because there's constant moving goalposts. There's no set, nothing that, and you don't even know your principles because they come from everywhere and they're even subconscious. So that's one thing. Um, and another idea is that they're worshipping their ego, where even if they know the principle isn't right, and I have regular conversations with somebody who is so obvious that like the um his ideas don't stand up to any scrutiny, but he just keeps going. Um, so I suppose that's this very interesting and important thing about being humble enough to realize you're not important, therefore your ideas should be challenged or something like that. Yeah,
Yes, yes,
yeah.
yeah,
Go on.
yeah. But because on the idolatry question, what has in fact happened with these people who worship their own opinions is that they're actually their own god. aren't they? I mean, atheism means that you worship yourself, you worship your own dumb opinions, and you're prepared to kill people or hurt people, if they go against you. And and this is really, the reality of it. And as regards to their identity, maybe they need to be told, like, actually, you're not God. You're not God. You really need to understand that you're not God.
And it sounds like a silly thing, but I'm imagining a friend of mine that and you've met him as well, but I try not to name people. It's quite obvious from some of my videos
Mhm.
that um it's a sense of like they have such a high view of their opinions, even if they don't stand up to any scrutiny. It's very interesting. So I'm just kind of thinking about what you're saying, because it's all very interesting. I'm not really, I don't think I'm particularly adding anything really. But yeah, very interesting. Yeah, people put themselves, and I would say very brittle egos, because everybody knows that they're not God, really. And so when you do something as false as thinking you're really important, and actually nobody's particularly important, um, then you stick to stupid ideas. Everybody, it's not just atheists, anybody who thinks they're important, some part of that idea is probably wrong. Like, I'm a Muslim, I have some ideas, whatever, but I might have misunderstood that idea to some extent. And I have to be humble enough to go, oh, I'm just a human being. Actually, I'm really, insignificant being. Very easy for me to be wrong. I should be open to the idea that I've misunderstood that idea or something. So I think that's a really important thing
Yes,
about
I think,
having humility. Yeah, go on.
yes, yes. I was going to say humility because, if you're being told about, the existence of God and you're supposed to believe in it, there would be a kind of hierarchy. Like, well, I could say something like, "Who are you to tell me, what to do? I'm as good as you." Blah blah blah. And these are the arguments that usually, begin with people who think they're equal to each other, and then you try to pull rank. I've been here longer than you. I'm smarter than you. I'm taller than you. I'm stronger than you, and all these arguments come about. But in terms of winning arguments, you're kind of using truth, you're using logic, and then finally you are referring to, does the Bible say it's okay to do this, or the Quran?
Yeah, so I'm putting I do want to get the comments involved. There are some interesting ones, like you're an atheist, which actually I would agree with. I don't believe in anybody being agnostic. I think that's an excuse, but we can talk about that for not saying what you definitely are. And there was somebody said that an interesting little comment about truth TM, which I thought that was quite clever. Like, what is the truth? Who's got the trademark? And I think that's worth discussing as well.
Hmm.
But I do want to go back. Like, I'm not being particularly orderly like I normally am, because I think you've got some really great ideas. I'm kind of listening to them, but sorry, I do want to go back and say, what has atheism, and we probably said this already, but maybe to clarify it, what has atheism got to do with liberalism? What would you say is the connection? Maybe we've said it already, but just to bring it back to
Um,
the title.
well, I suppose if liberalism is about individual liberty, then the idea is that you're allowed to think anything you like, and you should be able to do anything you like, within reason, within what the government says you are allowed to do. But if the government keeps changing its mind about what is permissible and what isn't, then it will eventually, create chaos. In the same way that our government is obviously making lots of laws, changing their mind, going back on their own word, and getting into trouble because there's so many laws that they're actually confused about which laws are enforced and which are not. and in this way you sow confusion and disrespect for the law. You are bringing the law into contempt by changing it so much that you forget which rules are in force.
Okay. Sorry, could you tell me again, like, so what's the connection between, maybe I missed it because I was half thinking about the comments as well. So what's the connection between atheism and liberalism for you? And then I'll have a go. Sorry, did you say it and I missed it or something?
Okay, I'll focus on what you actually asked me. What is the difference between atheism and
Or
liberalism?
connection, because we seem to be connecting them.
Um, yes, because if liberalism was a reaction against Christianity, um,
Yeah.
then and we know that before the French Revolution, um, well, basically, if you were the subject of a king who was Christian, you didn't have any freedom of belief at all. You had to follow the religion of your king, and if he showed to obviously that you didn't agree with the religion of your king, you would end up being burnt at the stake. So, Anabaptists would be burnt at the stake. People who denied the Trinity would be burnt at the stake. There were all kinds of, you know, statements that amount to blasphemy, and that would attract the death penalty. So before the French Revolution, the European really didn't have any freedom of belief at all. So I suppose atheism would be, the antithesis of being forced to believe in God.
Right, yeah. And if I look at atheism, they don't come and collect together and say, here are the things that we will do. Like, let's make a set of rules that we should abide by. I suppose there's legal rules, but there's no personal rules about what to live by. And I would say a lot of atheists would find that a stupid idea. It's like, oh, why would I set a rule, set a bunch of rules for myself? But actually, that's really sensible because that's how you live well. You live by rules. All the self-help books are a bunch of rules. Um, so yeah, so uh, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I was also going to say that sexual liberation. I mean, some of us might be a bit surprised because we knew liberalism in the beginning was not about that. But if you think about, how the other European countries regarded the French after their revolution, there's always this idea that the French were naughtier than, the other, more straight-laced European nations.
hmm.
So, in a way, it's perfectly logical that liberalism, at its final limit, would be about sexual liberation. Because it's sort of like, well, it's my body, I can do what I like with it, including commit suicide, you know.
Yeah, I suppose it's the same like why atheism is connected to nihilism is the same reason why atheism is connected to liberalism because there's no higher authority, there's no particular reason to do anything. So, in one sense, there's no reason to stop yourself from doing things. That's the liberalism side, and the nihilism side is there's no meaning to anything. So
Mm.
everything's random.
But
So
yes.
go on. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
No,
you.
no, that was it really.
Okay.
I'm just kind of thinking out loud and practicing this sort of I mean, new set of ideas, but you seem to be very good at expressing it, so I'm just kind of listening in.
Mhm.
Carry on.
Yes. So, just a moment. I think someone's at the door.
Sure. Okay. So let's go through some of the comments. Truth TM. I thought. I mean, maybe I'm understanding as sort of a sarcastic. I'm trying to look at political. Both of you live in liberal societies, yeah. Where, so you're maybe an atheist or something. Polycast. Um, and that's a good
Mhm.
point in a way. Like, is there a truth, the truth, and does anybody have a trademark on it? I think like that's what you're kind of saying. And So in Islam, at least, there's no compulsion in matters of religion, which means you can't force your ideas on other people. And the Quran constantly talks about explaining the reasoning behind its teachings. So,
Mhm.
when it comes to drinking alcohol, sure, there's some benefits the Quran says, but the bad effects far outweigh the benefits. All this kind of some all sorts of simple logic, some
Mhm.
reasoning. So what I mean to say is that religion doesn't enforce its will. It cannot, by at least Islam cannot enforce its will. It has to be a choice because the Quran says so. It has to be a choice, and it lets you inspect the ideas and stuff like that. So I think hidden in what you're trying to say, poly politicas, is that religions just come up with ideas that have not been tested and they're enforced on people. And I don't think that's anywhere near the reality. Um, yeah, do you have any thoughts about that, Claire? About this sort of very interesting comment, but I think that's what I got. I like the idea that I guess that politicas is an atheist who's saying that try religious people try to own the truth.
Well, actually, I would argue that God, if he exists, it's logical. I mean, if we don't see it that way, it's because we don't know his hidden purpose, which will, eventually become clear, with some, maybe with some historical perspective. But what I was trying to say before I was interrupted is this about these extremes of um, personal autonomy. So I guess if you really believe in God, you would think, oh, we are the slaves of God, and He'll get us, and He knows our hearts and minds, and and He tells us what we can and can't do with our bodies, with particular rules about sex. And if you're liberal and you rebel against this idea of some lie, as atheists tend to think God is, some made up idea controlling us and telling us what we can and can't do with our bodies, then the other extreme to this would be sexual liberation from, oh, sex is okay between consenting adults or even children or even siblings, as long as no unwanted pregnancy occurs, because that is how they think now.
Hmm.
And obviously, these ideas of sexual liberation will have a bearing on the quality of the next generation.
Yeah, yeah. So here's an interesting comment, and it seems very true. Are women's rights being censored through liberalism? It does seem that liberals, so-called liberals, through the LGBT stuff, seem to be enforcing their will on people. This is how it should be. What's wrong with you? How dare you do anything but our liberal ideas that we've concocted by ourselves 5 minutes ago? Um, what do you think about that?
Well, there's always a kind of wrong think in any, if you're communist or Nazi or whatever. It's sort of like, well, this is the official political orthodoxy. You have deviated from it. You are a deviant, and so liberalism forces you to be free. And you're saying, no, I don't want to be sexually liberated. I want to be, locked in a holy matrimony with my spouse. And and you have all these forces of liberal legislation pulling you apart, saying it's okay to divorce your spouse if you get bored and irritated. It doesn't matter about the children. Go ahead. Everybody's like that anyway. And and the thing about logic is that I think clever people can always think of some quick comeback to doing what, even if it's obviously stupid. They can think of a reason that sounds plausible and clever. But if they shouldn't do it, they shouldn't do it. And if they can't see the harm of it, it doesn't mean there is no harm to certain things that we've been told not to do. And then when you experience a harm, you're too late. It's too late to fix it.
Interesting. I'm not against people having intelligent debates, I do think it's a bit difficult one. That so the Quran says that truth breaks falsehood, but the thing is, you need to have the truth in the first place to outdo the other person in an intelligent or intellectual discussion. I suppose that's one idea. But the kind of thing that universal truth is put forward here, I think he was talking about where liberals, so-called liberals, are enforcing their LGBT ideas, like men can be women, therefore they can change in women's changing rooms, and you're not allowed to say anything. So on YouTube, you're not allowed to say certain things, otherwise you can have a strike and you'd be off.
Mhm.
There are a whole bunch of things you're not allowed to say, and that's in a so-called liberal society. And it's so liberals seem to push their ideologies, and you can't disagree with their ideologies. That seems to be very anti-liberal, but that seems to be the brand of liberalism we seem to have at the moment. I feel like that's what I get from the sense I get from Universal Truth Con are women's rights being censored through liberalism. And I think that seems to be a reality. I mean, how do you feel about that? Like, liberals seem to be pushing their ideologies in a very unliberal way.
Yes, it's totalitarian because all these sort of name calling. It's like, oh, you said that, that means you're a Nazi or
But there
you're
are consequences
transphobic.
as well. It's not just name calling. There are consequences. You get thrown off YouTube or and everything if you disagree. That's the problem with Andrew Tate. He's just being thrown off everything. So you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, and it's so obviously totalitarian that and then I guess if we complain, then it's like, oh, you're Andrew Tate supporters, we're going to zap your channel too. Um, and 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 um, and I suppose the danger of that for the government is that actually, if you're governing a country, you need to know about the problems, and you shouldn't shut people up if they're complaining. You might say, well, you shouldn't complain because X, Y, and Z, or you have a point. If you're genuine about caring about the people you govern, you would feel bad, if people say your government is terrible and you'd want to fix it. You wouldn't want to just shoot the messenger.
Hmm.
Because I mean, basically, they say, "Well, shut up." One of the points made in the exchange between Tucker and Tate was that they're making this joke about climate change. It's sort of like um, how they deal with there being a heat wave is they break the thermometer. That's their way of dealing with it. And
Yeah, they have a whole bunch of ideologies he was explaining that sure you might want to fix the environment, but then you have to agree with homosexuality, for example, and is exactly what's happening. So they have these what they called like governments have to abide by certain rules, ESPs, or I don't know what they're called, and they said to save the environment, you have to do 100 other things that we think are part of being a better person, and that includes, uh, you know employing certain number of people who are homosexual or something like that, and or more black
yeah, yeah,
people or
quotas,
something like that.
quotas.
Quotas, yeah.
Yeah,
But yeah, so they have one idea and then they're throwing a bunch of other ideas of their own, and that's how they supposedly save the environment. Does that make any sense? Like
well,
like
they are not making sense, but they're basically, the boss, and they can say, well, we just changed the rules. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it?
hmm,
We can because we're the government, and we will keep changing the rules, and you really can't complain. And one of the reasons why I keep saying religion is so important is that, okay, this is an extreme example. Supposing we were all Nazis. And then we sort of know, we're the people who hate Jews, and we're never nice to Jews, and everything about us is about being mean to them. And then suddenly the government says, you've got to be nice to Jews now. You've got to marry them, and you've got to be extra nice to them, and you think, well, what's going on? I thought we were people who because that is how you can keep tabs on your government. like, well, you've just made this crazy law for no reason at all. Because right now, um, people in America where there isn't an official religion, I mean, Jews can say, well, according to the Torah, blah blah blah, and then the government will say, well, we're not Jews. When our official religion is not Judaism, and a Christian would say, according to Christianity, we mustn't do this, and they'll say we're not Christians. A Muslim says the same thing, we're not Muslims. So you can't even pin them down on their stupid, crazy law.
Okay. I'm just gonna. There is obviously an elephant in the room, which is you're an agnostic, and I would call you an atheist because I don't believe in anything called being an agnostic. But I don't want to get distracted by that too much because I don't think that's the main thing. I don't want. I'm just saying that so I don't forget. Hopefully, maybe you'll remind me. Um, but so I love categorizing. So I'm trying to understand the key reasons why I do see the reality that atheists are very easy manipulated, and so one is that they don't seem to have any foundations. Like here are some basic rules about reality, and that's not just about changing identity. That's just a modern issue. It's also about how you dress yourself. You know, Muslims have always said, and Orthodox Jews and Christians have always said you cover a certain amount, women cover even more. These are the rules. And so liberals are like, you can wear no clothes or you can whatever. So that's one reason we've been talking about the principles. There are no principles. And then the other two that I don't think we mentioned really, but this is how I summarize it. It might sound weird, but this is how I summarized it, and I'll try to explain it. Easily bribed addicts. What do I mean by that? So, anybody who is not religious is not particularly calm. Why I say that is because they look for pleasure over peace. They are they're desperately looking for the next thing to make them happy because they're desperately unhappy. And that's actually in line with psychologists who say if you want to truly be happy, deeply happy, you have to have meaning, not just looking for temporary pleasures. Um, so when you're essentially an addict, you're easily manipulated. Like, say you're a cocaine addict, then they put an advert out. It's okay, you can get cocaine here this way or that way, packaged in this way and that way. You jump to it. You don't really think too clearly because you're an addict. You're really thinking short term. That's how I see, and actually, that's how the Quran actually describes disbelievers. Disbelievers are people who are constantly chasing a mirage that has no real value. Does that make any sense? So you're chasing mirage, and in short, you're easily manipulated by adverts for different things that might give you a bit of peace. But if you're religious, you have a sense of serenity where you don't fall for every stupid advert. That's one thought. What do you think about that?
Well, materialism can manifest itself in shopaholism. So, and I saw a documentary on shopaholics, and they go around buying things, and they don't even bother opening the packages that they bought. So the hit that they get is the actual acquisition, the moment of acquisition, and then it's like, oh, I've got so many, I don't know, Macs and shoes or whatever, and I can't even be bothered to open them. So, there's something. Um, it's a mind thing. It's a behavioral addiction.
Yeah,
And if you're an atheist, then you're going to worship your own ego. You're going to worship your own appetites, and that is how you allow you've made a god of appetites.
yeah, yeah. It's if you're religious, you've got some very clear things to do with your life. And if you're not, then you've got to fill it with something like wandering around the shops. You're not going to go to church, you're not going to a mosque, you're not going to talk to your friends, whatever, and socialize and think about. Yeah, okay. And then the other idea is that they are anti truth. And so you might think, oh, atheists sell themselves as the bearers of truth, the torchbearers of truth, but they seem very far from it when you debate with them. That seems to be my example. So if I look at Richard Dawkins' books, there are lots of clever words to tell all sorts of lies. As soon as you inspect them a little bit, you can see they're filled with lies. I'll just give you an example. When he was talking about the probability of God existing, he would cleverly say, I don't want to get too boring and technical, but it goes something like, you've got these strands of not DNA, but enzymes. You know what? Just forget three of them, which just let's think of a one strand. So the more strands you have, the more complicated this thing is. So he very cleverly weaves or tells lies, and this seems to be a very common thing. They're very okay. Let me put it another way, without being too boring. Atheists hardly ever inspect the idea of the probability that God exists. What they do instead, they just insult religion.
Mm-hmm.
I really do feel that seems to be their thing, their anti-truth. And the reason why I strongly feel that is because if you start off with the biggest lie there is, which is there is no God, like every experience in your life will tell you that there is a God. You do not need to see, if you see the creation, you know the creator, especially if it's very complicated. To be honest, I fell for atheism as well because I fell for this idea. Maybe it's worth discussing. I don't know. That we had loads of time, so anything is possible. But
Mm-hmm.
actually, there's a lot of there's a lot of holes in that idea. One massive hole is that things don't come together by themselves; they fall apart by themselves by default. If you put a
Entropy.
sandcastle on a beach, over time, it won't become a better sandcastle; it will fall apart. What were you going to say?
Entropy. I knew you were going
Entropy,
to talk.
exactly.
You're
Yeah,
talking about the third
this. Yeah, I
law,
think second, but
thermodynamics.
is it second or third? But anyway, second.
Second, okay.
Okay, the law of thermodynamics.
One
Yeah,
of them,
one of
anyway.
those. Yeah, um, yeah. So, I mean, to what extent do you think atheists are anti-truth, or do you disagree with that? How do you feel about that as idea?
Okay, you told me to refer, justify my
Yeah, let's go to that
agnosticism.
then. Come on. Yeah, go on.
So I'm basically saying you can't force people to make the logical inference, because you're saying there was a creation, therefore there must have been a creator, and that creator was Allah, and the atheist will say, well, how do you know the universe was created? Maybe it was always there, and it was uncreated. So if it's not created, then there's no need for a creator, and there's no need to worship God, and we don't have to obey His laws. But I mean, and you come back as a theist, I suppose, or somebody who wants to obey God's laws, and you're saying the whole point of obeying God's laws is that you keep your group in existence and apart from others. And really, when you think about it, the most powerful human groups are religious groups. And there are five world religions, and okay, then Jews. It's like, ooh, people always go on about them, and they, all these Christians and Muslims, they always complain about Jews, and then you think, yeah, but the God of Israel is really, also Allah, and therefore you kind of have to acknowledge that, okay, Jews may be annoying, but they're around and they have this religion which requires them to worship the most powerful being conceivable, and it is also apparently the religion of Christians and Muslims. And they've been around for so long, and you think, well, if you want your civilization to last, you better follow something like that.
So, the elephant in the room that I was talking about is basically we're insulting atheists, um, and you're calling yourself an agnostic. Are you not also controlled as easily as an atheist by all these things, the lack of principles, and I would say, open to materialism, materialistic addictions, and things like that. Are you not open to? Are agnostics really that different to atheists in terms of being controlled like cattle?
Well, I think there are different kinds of agnostics. I mean, I know, agnostics that drive me crazy because they literally haven't made up their mind. I'm saying, actually, I think and behave like a theist because I'm saying it's useful because I'm a secular Quranist, and obviously, once you invest, in the whole idea, you find yourself using it, and the more you use it, the more um, useful it becomes to you, and then you can think like a believer. You can actually think like a believer.
Hmm, interesting. So you can take on the benefits of being a believer to some extent. I do think it does. I don't want to be like a broken record, but you know what I'm going to say. It does help to really believe,
Hmm.
because that gives you the actual strength, like there's a serious authority that you're following, rather than pretending there's a serious authority, which is a bit hard to believe. Um, so okay, cool. Yeah, and I don't want to like stretch this out over an hour unnecessarily. I just wanted to bash out some ideas.
Hmm.
I'm just thinking there were some other interesting comments. Just interesting. I don't know. I'm confused. So you said he's not. He said he's not an atheist. But yeah, let me see what else he's got to say here. You need to read up on liberalism. It's very well defined principles. Yeah, well, it depends what liberalism you're talking about. I have actually done A level politics, but those initial liberal ideas are completely different to, and there are different brands, and it's not really practiced by anybody. Would you say? I can't even remember the names of all these people, but there's utilitarianism and all these other
Oh
ideas.
yes, Bentham and Mill and
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody really practices any of the established ideas of liberalism. Liberalism just means pretty much I'm free to do whatever I want. Or what do you think?
it's the doings and sayings of the Anglo-Saxon Empire.
Hmm.
And they've been making up the rules as they go along. They've been doing it for 250 years, and they're
Hmm.
about to crash and burn.
Yeah, I'm really not into those kind of. There's this other liberal, and you probably know who I'm talking about, who loves defining things and feels clever about defining things. Um, but actually, you probably waste your time defining liberalism because nobody follows it anyway. Liberalism seems, if we were roughly defining it, would be, from my experience, you have a right to do things and not so much to respond, and they really hate the idea of responsibility, which is really sad because I remember one of my very, I don't know, not quotes, but one of the great ideas I love from Viktor Frankl. He says that it's great to have the Statue of Liberty, but I wish there was a Statue of Responsibility, because actually liberalism doesn't do anything for you by itself. It gives you the option to make good choices, but it's only when you have a responsible life, which sounds really dull, but can your life possibly have any meaning? When you're willing to make a sacrifice for something, that is when you have a principle and your life has some sort of meaning and direction, and that's what human beings are actually excited about. What do you think about that?
Yes, I think you actually have to have some restriction in order that you feel liberated from those restrictions, right? I mean, if you kind of think of it as I don't know, gym equipment, the dumbbells and whatever, and it is through these rules, through negotiating these rules, that you hone your intelligence and you know what you're supposed to do or what's sort of in the grey area or whatever. I mean, I'm prepared to be generous to liberalism, I can say, oh, liberalism means freedom of belief, freedom of expression, freedom of contract, freedom of association, and the right to property. And these are, but then you can think, oh well, but actually, the Quran also gives you these things.
So if you're happy with this, I'm going to do a roundup. I'm going to do the rare thing of having a only 1 hour conversation with you. I think we've
Mhm.
said loads of great things, and I'm going to try to do a summary of what I think is the answer to are atheists easy to control as cattle, and then I'll let you say the last word because I think you're more funny as well. Um, so the 3 points or three categories or reasons why it is true that atheists are as easy to control as cattle or sheep, as somebody else mentioned. Um, One thing is that they have no foundations. They're trying to work out life from the bottom up. That's an impossible task. And and I think we both agreed on this. That's such an impossible task to have infinite choices. You're not going to make the right choice. So you're perpetually confused. There's kind of a lack of stability because of that lack of foundation. And then you can fall for every fad, I suppose, because there
Mhm.
is no one thing that's right. Atheists, if you look at them, they seem to follow every fad of the time. And if you look at religious people, they're like, nope, I'm going to wear these clothes that I've been always wearing for the last few hundred years. And it suits me fine. And it makes sense because I've thought about it. So that's one. Like, they have no foundation. Atheists have no foundation, so therefore they're confused. They're always trying to figure stuff out, and then they make bad choices from the infinite choices. Um, then I see them as easily bribed addicts to materialism. So if you're not religious, you're not constantly working on inner peace, so your balance in life, and you're just jumping at whatever you think might make you happy. That's my experience um, of atheists, because there's no meaning. You're just grabbing whatever you can for the now. You're living in the now, as it were. Um, and so there's an easy let's go back to the what you said. Maybe I'll put it on the screen as a sort of reminder. Let me see if I can there's a sort of they're easily controlled with carrot and stick. And I really do think the carrot of materials, the endless adverts for rubbish, if you don't have a firm set of values of what's important outside materialism, and everything is materialism because there's nothing else that's called the spirit because you're an atheist, then you grab every piece of rubbish, I suppose. Maybe I could put that better, but I think, yeah, you can see religious people really don't care about all the stuff that's being advertised because they've already decided there's another way of life and you don't need all that stuff. And the stuff that's really important is not the material stuff. But if you don't have that, then all that is left is the material stuff. So that's the second idea. And then lastly, where's my little list? Well, that's good that it didn't change that. Um, and they're really anti-truth, and it comes back to the ego idea. Two things actually. When you deny God, that is the greatest lie. That's what how I see it. It's the greatest lie to deny your benefactor and the obvious reality, the reality that if you see a creation there must be a creator. We don't have any other experience, and all the laws of science tell you that as well. But because we're so desperate, atheists, really the real thing behind atheism is the will or the wish to do anything and not to follow laws, then you do anything but the thing that will restrict you. And that's why they are usually the liberals, because their idea of liberalism is do anything you want. You're free to do. You're free to be a trans. You're free. Why do I care about society? I should be taking care of myself. You know, I don't care about the consequences, whereas religious people are very centered on the idea of their social responsibility, which calms them down and stops them from simply um, wanting to do everything but everything, anything, um, in spite of all their consequences, in spite of all the reasoning that tells them this is going to be bad for everybody else or anybody. So they're anti-truth because I see I'm going on a bit long, and also because they worship their ego, like you said, they worship their ego, so they also become anti-truth because they refuse to ever be wrong because they think they are so important. For religious people, only God is important, everybody else is kind of stupid, really, so we can easily be wrong and easily change your point of view. Sorry for going on a bit, but those are my few three kind of categories of why atheists are easy to control like cattle. What are your thoughts, please?
Um, I think the situation can be made very clear by imagining that there are two armies. One is an atheist army, and the other is a bit, an army of Muslims. And that they know they're going to be rewarded, or they believe they will be rewarded in the afterlife. So I would suggest to you that the Muslim army will fight more bravely and not be so afraid to die as the atheist army. Let's assume that they're all, equal in number and equally armed with the same, level or, same kind of equipment. I think even atheists would have to acknowledge that the um, the one that believes in God will fight more bravely.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and the other thing is that if you think that this life is all the life you're going to have, you won't be able to say no to all kinds of promiscuous women offering you sex. Probably, you just wouldn't be able to say no because you think, oh well, I'll be missing all that fun if I don't do it, if I don't accept the offer. Uh,
I like the way you put things. Oh, sorry, any more points?
I think that's about it.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like I'm overly trying to analyze and make a technical answer, but I like your story kind of way of explaining things. But you're a lot more fun. All right. Thank you very much, Claire. Appreciate your time. Peace be upon you.
Thank you
Bye.
for having me. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
You're
Bye.
welcome. Bye.